dawn in Kyoto. Mist drifts between gravestones as if the earth itself were exhaling. The temple bell rings, deep and low, and the sound rolls through the cedar grove like distant thunder wrapped in cloth. The air smells of rain and incense, wet moss and stone. This is not a place of despair. It is a place that breathes. In Japan, death does not end in silence. It dissolves into landscape, into moss, into roots, into the rhythm of seasons. Here, the cemetery is not a wound, but a garden. Every patch of green remembers what lies beneath, and every blossom is a soft act of translation between body and earth. The monks call it shoji to ichinyo, life and death as one. You can see it in the way the wind moves through the bamboo, carrying the same whisper that once passed through lungs. In the hills west of Kyoto lies Saihō-ji, the Temple of Moss, Kokedera. Long before it became a UNESCO treasure, it was a humble Zen temple that nearly vanished beneath rain and neglect. Its salvation came not from restoration, but from surrender. The monks stopped sweeping. The moss returned. Over centuries, more than 100 varieties took root. Velvety, feathered, luminous green. The graves beneath them blurred into the forest floor. Visitors began to kneel, not before stone Buddhas, but before the living carpet that covered their feet. The monks said the moss was memory. It absorbed sorrow, softened edges, and gave decay, a texture of peace. In early Heian times, burial was often simple, a mound of soil beneath trees, with a stone or wooden tablet for prayer. But the Buddhist principle of mujo, impermanence, turned that simplicity into meaning. The body was seen as compost for compassion, and the moss that grew over graves was its first sermon. Poets came to Kokedera to study transience. One wrote, "The graves are gone, but the rain remembers." By the Edo period, temple gardens across Kyoto followed the same rhythm, allowing moss, lichen, and wild grass to cover stones. Maintenance became meditation, to care for decay without resisting it. Even emperors requested that their ashes rest under living green rather than polished marble. Beauty, they believed, should remain unfinished, forever returning to the soil that made it. As cities swelled during the Edo era, graveyards began to crowd their temples. Land was scarce, but philosophy provided a solution. Instead of stone, plant life became the monument. The practice was called jumoku-so, tree burial. Ashes were interred beneath young saplings. Roots became both shroud and air. The spirit did not vanish. It leafed out again each spring. Kamakura, once the seat of the shogunate, became one of the first cities to embrace this idea. Monks there taught that planting a tree for the dead allowed karma to keep breathing, the body nourishing new life, the tree's shadow extending the prayer. Families visited these groves in all seasons, in spring for blossoms, in summer for shade, in autumn for the gold of decay. Children grew up seeing their ancestors not as ghosts, but as trees they could touch. In a record from 1831, a priest at Jufuku-ji wrote, "A tree that grows from a grave is not a sign of death, but of patience." The people began calling such places iki no haka, living graves. Unlike the silent stone cemeteries of the West, these sites were full of movement, cicadas droning, leaves trembling, rain whispering through canopies. The dead became part of weather. When Western visitors arrived in the late 19th century, they wrote in amazement of Japan's green graves, calling them gardens that do not grieve. They didn't understand that grief was not denied here. It was cultivated, tended, allowed to bloom. Far to the south, where mountains meet sea, Nagasaki shaped its cemeteries to the rhythm of tide and rain. Because the city was Japan's window to the world, its only open port during centuries of isolation, its burial rites blended Buddhist, Shinto, and Christian echoes, On the slopes above the harbor, graves faced the ocean. Families poured seawater or sake upon the stones, returning a part of the body to the element that connects all shores. The salt, they believed, purified not only the deceased, but the living who remained. Some graves were built into the cliffs, half hidden by ferns and mist. At high tide, the waves reached their base, erasing footprints and flowers alike. The ocean became a caretaker, carrying offerings away, returning them as foam. In Buddhist symbolism, water means passage. In Christian thought, it means cleansing. In Nagasaki, the two became one. The dead were not confined to ground. They drifted, reflected, dissolved. Travelers in the 1800s described how locals would sit on the shore at twilight, watching lanterns float out to sea during Toro Nagashi, the festival of drifting lights. Each flame marked a soul's journey home. The sea glittered with hundreds of tiny suns. For a few minutes, it was impossible to tell which lights were above and which were below. Heaven and reflection mingling in the same tide. In those moments, death became an element, not an ending. Japan's cities continued to swell. Space vanished, faith transformed. The 20th century brought industry, war, and recovery, and with them, new questions about how to remember. Traditional family tombs, with their granite pillars and incense bowls, no longer fit the rhythm of urban life. People moved, families fractured, belief became quieter, yet the need for continuity persisted. In the 1990s, the movement of Jumoku Reian, forest cemeteries, began to spread. The most famous was established in Iwate by a Buddhist priest named Matsuhisa Shodo. He planted hundreds of cherry, maple, and oak trees in place of gravestones. Instead of names carved in stone, small plaques hung from branches. Ashes were buried in cloth, not urns, allowing the soil to breathe. He called it Inochi no Mori, the forest of life. His idea was not rebellion against tradition, but its continuation. In Buddhist cosmology, all things interpenetrate, nothing exists alone. The human body, once returned to soil, becomes nourishment for other lives. Each spring, the Iwate forest bursts into pink and white blossoms. Families gather beneath the trees, picnicking where their ancestors sleep. Children play, elders pray. The air fills with laughter, wind, and petals. Death has become a season. Even in Tokyo's towering cemeteries, small green sanctuaries appear. Rooftop gardens, temples with vertical walls of flowers, memorial forests tended by monks and gardeners alike. The line between sacred and ecological has vanished. At the edge of Morioka, in northern Japan, lies a place unlike any cemetery in the world. It looks at first like a park. Paths wind through cherry trees, ponds reflect clouds, and benches sit under shade. Only upon closer look do you notice small stones half buried in grass, each engraved with a family's name, modest, nearly hidden. This is Jumoku Reian Iwate, the blooming cemetery. Here, no tombs rise from the ground. Every life rests beneath a tree. Every tree carries several lives. The result is a living forest that changes color with the seasons. Pale pink in spring, deep green in summer, red in autumn, silent white in winter. Visitors do not bow in sorrow. They stroll. They bring picnics, cameras, tea. On anniversaries, families tie ribbons or hang origami cranes on branches. When the wind moves, the paper birds flutter like spirits in conversation. Monks describe it as Kokai no Niwa, the garden of return. Their belief is simple. If the Buddha found enlightenment under a tree, then perhaps the dead can find peace there too. The cemetery has no perimeter walls. Deer sometimes wander in from the mountains. Crows perch on memorial stones. Rain nourishes flowers that were never planted. Maintenance here is collaboration, not control. The living care for what grows cares for the living. When a person's ashes are buried, a small tree is planted above, often cherry, maple, or camellia. The family tends it for years. When the next generation visits, they find shade instead of shadow. One elderly visitor said, "When my husband died, I planted him a cherry tree." Every spring he blooms again. It is hard to miss someone who keeps returning. Japan's cemeteries are not monuments to permanence, but to transformation. They remind us that grief, like moss, grows best in gentle shade, not under marble, but under rain. From the moss temples of Kyoto to the blooming groves of Iwate, each generation has turned decay into design, loss into landscape. The garden does not hide death, it teaches it. In Buddhist thought, there is no final stillness, only movement between forms. The body becomes soil, the soil becomes flower, the flower becomes memory. Every season rewrites the same truth. Nothing truly disappears. As twilight falls over Kyoto once more, the bell rings again, or the sound drifts over moss, over roots, over stones softened by centuries. A monk sweeps the path, though he knows the moss will reclaim it by morning. That too is part of the rhythm. He pauses, looks up. Between the branches, fireflies begin to shine, tiny lanterns of impermanence. The air hums with life, though the ground is full of the dead. The two are inseparable, bound by the same breath. The garden listens, the earth exhales, and in that living silence, the lesson endures. To die beautifully is not to vanish, but to bloom where memory takes root.